Hey everybody, welcome today, and I'm going to just jump into our topic today. This is one that is near and dear to my heart. It's absolutely changed my life, and I pray that it has yours. Now listen, it might sound a little legalistic at first, but it's because you probably had somebody teach you about this that really didn't have a heart for it. It was just a box they checked off. We're talking about Sabbath today, okay? I learned that this topic for the first time really when I came to Christ in college in 2002. Geneva College, whom I really love, had this rule that you couldn't vacuum or do laundry on the Sabbath. We weren't allowed to do any work on the Sabbath, yet we were allowed to do homework, we were allowed to drive, we were allowed to, the workers were allowed to feed, lunch to everybody. It was kind of odd to me. I was like, there's just like a lot of compromise in this. It doesn't really make sense. But the reason it didn't make sense was because I didn't see the value of it in my life. This was a legalistic box that I needed to check off. But Sabbath is not a legalistic box, although it's one of the 10 commandments. It is a relational aspect that God commands for all of his followers. It's about relationship. So this started to make sense to me a little bit more recently in my leadership journey, but I realized that busyness was actually a pandemic in my life. I mean, it was a cancer in my life. In college, I worked about 20 hours, I worked about 10 hours on the weekend. I was interning several hours a week at a local ministry. I was taking 18 credits. I was a discipleship coordinator. I was a football captain, and I had a pretty awesome girlfriend that I wanted to make sure was my wife one day. I had a lot on my plate, and I realized that this man, he told me, I asked him, I said, hey, what's the best thing that I can do to get into ministry one day? And he said, kill yourself serving. So I was like, I'll do it, and I formed this identity of working really, really hard to essentially worship God and to prove my worth to God. Like, God, I'm so grateful for what you did, so I'm going to give my work back to you. But now I'm going to show you, God, you made the right choice in changing my life. And so I swung the pendulum completely on the opposite side of Sabbath, and I just worked and worked and worked and did everything I could. I had so many passions and so many distractions, but I didn't understand Sabbath, okay? Now, fast forward, I kept that going in my life. I was a youth pastor, young adult pastor, and completing a large renovation. I don't need to get into the details of it, but I worked so hard, my body actually started to shut down, okay? There were issues for me of sleep. I felt like I had diabetes. I was like, what is going on? And I realized I was working so much, I only slept 4 hours a night, and my body was actually starting to shut down. My son looked at me and he said, Daddy, are you going to come home soon? Meaning he didn't even know if I lived there anymore. Okay. That's how hard I worked. As a society, though, we've run away from anything relating to Sabbath, rest, silence. And God's voice has also simultaneously dimmed. Have you noticed that? I just want to ask you today, if you find yourself in a season like I was, where I was running and I had my hand in all of these pots and everything. And now don't swing it in the other side and just like quit everything today. But I want to ask you something. How's this working for you? Are you tired? Are you worn out? Because Jesus actually said, if you're living for him, that his burden is light, like he's not going to wear you out, right? The New Testament actually says in the end times, in the last days, the enemy will wear out the saints. It's fascinating. But how's it working? Are you worn out? Worn out isn't from God, okay? It doesn't show God how much you love him. It doesn't show God how valuable you are. Your value comes intrinsically from him. He's built it inside of you. And now we work outside of our value. We say, man, Lord, I know I'm valuable, therefore I can accomplish. So how's this busyness working for you? Give you a couple quotes, and I think these are really going to help you. A lady named Corrie ten Boom, if you haven't read her book called The Hiding Place, I'd encourage you to do so. It's not actually about rest. It's about the Holocaust. It's a fascinating historical book, but of how God showed up as she witnessed and led so many people to safety and to Christ. Corrie ten Boom became a minister after this, and she famously quoted, if the devil can't make you bad, he will make you busy. How many of you know that's right? This is what the CEO of Netflix said once. He might not be the CEO today, but he was when he said this. He said, you get a show or a movie you're really dying to watch, and you end up staying up late at night. So we actually compete with sleep, not Amazon Prime, not HBO. Reed Hastings said they compete with sleep. I mean, that's fascinating. Rest. Well, how's that working for us, right? Now, did you know this? There's a tie between genius and rest. I'm going to show you something, okay? Isaac Newton, think about this. You remember how he discovered the law of gravity? What was he doing? He was sitting under an apple tree and he was sipping tea. Einstein thought of the theory of relativity while leisurely riding his bike. He was just riding his bike, just enjoying himself, right? Churchill was said to take a 2-hour nap a day. I mean, that's a lot. Da Vinci slept 20 minutes every 4 hours. All these men were geniuses who clearly prioritized rest. And I want to challenge you with this, with a simple question today. What genius is your addiction to busy robbing you of? What is it robbing of you in your life? Pastor Craig is a good friend of mine, and he works for one of the best teaching ministries in the world. He was a mentor of mine for years, and I call him from time to time just to see how he's doing and ask him questions. He's now gotten promoted to be, one of the 3 people who get to teach in this amazing ministry, which is fantastic, okay? He said, however, that their team doesn't allow him to preach unless he'll guarantee that he spends an hour in his prayer closet, not even praying, but just listening. Pastor Craig said this to me. He said, Zach, sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. I want to look at you and I want to say, if you find yourself in a season of busy, if you find yourself overwhelmed and burdened, permission to take a nap. I'm giving you permission to take a nap, okay? I am. Now, there's 2 things about Sabbath I want you to walk away from now that my intro to all this is over. I want you to know this. You've got to know these things. Number 1, rest is not a sign of laziness. Rest is a sign of faith. We see in Mark chapter 8, Mark tells the story of Jesus asleep in the boat during the storm. I'm going to pick up right here. It says, Jesus got in the boat and his followers went with him. A great storm rose on the lake so that the waves covered the boat. But Jesus, where was he? He was sleeping. His followers went to him and they woke him. Naturally, they said, Lord, save us, we will drown. And Jesus answered, why are you so afraid? He got up off of his pillow. One translation said he was laying, his head was just asleep on the pillow. He looked up, he's like, why are you so scared? What are you so afraid of, right? It reminds me of my kids coming in the room in the middle of the night afraid of something. I'm like, put my head up, I'm like, what? What's going on? There's a reason that I'm able to sleep through the night, and sometimes they're not. They're afraid of something. They might have heard a noise, or they might have seen something scary at school or over a friend's house. And they said, my son came in one time and he was so afraid because he saw a picture of something that just kind of popped up on YouTube on the search, and he was just so scared of it, right? There's a reason I'm not afraid. It's because I think that's stupid, right? Different levels here. But the more that rest is not a sign of laziness. Rest is actually a sign of faith. Like Jesus knew he was going to be completely fine. Therefore, he rested. Okay. And I've learned in my life, and I want to challenge you with this thought. I can rest no matter what's going on in my life, and you can rest no matter what's going on in your life. Sabbath is actually saying, God, I trust you. I trust you. But listen, I want you to know this principle. I'm going to dig deeper into this thought, okay? Because Sabbath is a sign of faith. It's actually, Sabbath is a byproduct of faith, okay? I want you to know this, that faith, what is faith? Faith is believing what God says about whatever else. Like faith is trusting God's word, right? Faith is coming to God, believing God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, right? Faith is, by faith, the world was created. By faith, like you have faith, you can say unto this mountain, be thou removed and be cast in the sea. We've all heard the scriptures about faith. But what I define faith as, if you want to walk a life of faith, faith is actually kneeling to God's power in the midst of any of your deficits. He never asks you to give whenever you have all the money. He never asks you to rest when you have the time to rest. Isn't that fascinating? Faith is actually kneeling to God's power in the midst of our deficits. See, if you could do everything that you could do, that God's called you to do alone, then you really don't need him, right? He actually calls us to depend on him. So Sabbath is saying this, God, I trust you can do more with my 6 days than I can do on my own with 7, okay? So the second thing I want you to know is rest is a command from God. Rest is a commandment. It's the number 4 commandment, okay? Out of the 10, number 4. It's number 4. I mean, it's up there with murder. It's up there with adultery. It's up there with honoring your father and mother, about bearing false witness. It's number 4. Why don't we talk about that? Like, we have a conscience to not lie and to not kill somebody, but we are okay with breaking Sabbath. And this is where it could get potentially legalistic, because you're like, wait a second, like, I have to take a Sabbath? Oh no, like, well, you were created to do a Sabbath, okay? And Christ actually is rest. You know, we who enter into Christ, enter into his rest, okay? The scriptures in Hebrews say. But this rest in the Old Testament was pointed to resting from all of your efforts to gain God, right? But it's still a commandment. Jesus modeled this rest in Luke chapter 5, verse 16. He says, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. He would go alone and he would spend time with God. Okay? So here this principle pops out of my mind, right? God doesn't command us to do something that he himself doesn't model. He did it in the book of Genesis in chapter 1. On the 7th day, what did he do? He started building more. No. On the 7th day, he rested. Okay? Now, I learned this principle. I would love to say that, throughout all my time in ministry, from that moment on, whenever my body shut down, and then I took a year and a half off of ministry, then we started Hill City Church, I would love to say that I was perfect at this, but I wasn't, right? I had broken my ankle really badly, and my son looks at me because I was immobile. I wasn't able to walk normally for about a year. That's how bad my ankle surgery was and how bad I broke my ankle. So my son looks at me and he said, Dad, I don't want to get in trouble, but I just want you to know I really don't mind that you broke your ankle. And I was like, well, it's all right, buddy. What's up? And he's like, well, we're playing more video games and we're watching movies together. And he's like, Dad, like, we're spending more time together. And at that moment, I realized, I'm not going to say that God broke my ankle by any means, but I will say that he used my circumstances to recalibrate my heart toward rest. And from that moment forward, I began to give God margin. Have you ever built a fire and all the wood is together and all you see is smoke? All you got to do is open up that fire, give the air a little bit of room to breathe, and that fire is going to burn hot, okay? Same principle is true in your walk with God. Maybe the fire in your heart isn't burning hot because you just haven't created any margin. You're running from one place to the next. You're up, you're down, you're everywhere in between. You are not rested, and busyness is drowning out the voice of God in your life. There are seasons of busy, but if your season of busy is lasting more than a few months, it's not a season, it's actually a problem, okay? So at the Blair House, this is what we do. We work hard 6 days of the week, and we rest hard 1 day of the week. Man, we get all of our chores done on Friday. I have a day off on Friday. My kids have a day off on Friday as well from their school. I'm so blown away by the faithfulness of God at that. I never thought I'd have 2 consecutive days off with my kids. But we get all our chores done on Friday. Then Friday night, we enter into rest, a 24-hour period of rest. I make a big meal in the morning and big meal at night. We use paper plates so we don't have too much work to do. We play board games together. We watch movies together. I'll get out my guitar. We'll sing some songs, some worship songs together. We have music time. We pray together. We journal. We open up our scriptures. But for the most part, that day, although we spend time with God and prioritize time with God, that day is primarily spent around doing things that fill up our heart and resting. We'll take a hike. We'll go out to the stream and just listen to the sounds and just walk and just go outside and throw football with one another or take the dog on a walk. Sabbath, to my kids, is not legalistic. To my kids, it's not just a religious commandment, it's their favorite day of the week. To my kids, Sabbath is not a time where we can't do anything, but a time where we get to do everything that fills up our heart. I want to challenge you to do that, okay? I want to challenge you to have a Sabbath. When I have this practice in my life, I'm fully energized for the week ahead. When I don't, I'm not. Come on, you can do this. Have a Sabbath. Hard to say. Come on, you're going to have to edit that out there, Caleb. Come on, today I want to challenge you. Have a Sabbath.